Simpozion in the period of 78 RPM records from the mid-1920s to the early 1950s. Around 6,000 recordings that they put on the Yugoslav market, the preserved records, the music of them, and their impact on subsequent music practices can be observed as heritage in terms of UNESCO program of intangible cultural heritage. Even more, however, they can be observed from the perspective of popular music studies, in which the concept of heritage has also gained prominence in the last decade. It means, in popular music studies, heritage means those aspects of the past that are important in creating a sense of identity among a particular group of people, whether a nation, a city, or a neighborhood. Heritage is therefore highly contested and always changing. The emphasis on the past distinguishes this definition of heritage from the ethnographic Unesconian one, and hence, in the analysis within the framework of popular music studies, heritage is anchored in the material manifestations of music, primarily in the recording of themselves, their curation, circulation, consumption, and possession, but also in other diverse physical forms, in heritage locations, for instance, former clubs, halls of fame, museums, in re-releases of historical recordings, in musical instruments and clothing of prominent musicians, in promotional items such as posters, badges, ticket stubs, and so on. In connection with the second key emphasis, heritage as contested and always changing, very influential in popular music studies is the distinction between authorized, self-authorized, and unauthorized heritage. Authorized in terms of institutionally canonized heritage by the system of power and associated cultural institutions, self-authorized in terms of heritage recognized and promoted by influential stakeholders of the music industry or certain communities, and unauthorized in terms of heritage in the making that is in the wider society actually still only a practice that does not have its powerful or influential advocates. Both of these emphases are relevant in the Yugoslav context and intertwine with each other. On the one hand, in terms of the physical preservation and availability of recordings in public institutions, which is generally speaking very limited and efficient, and on the other hand, in terms of incredibly active individuals, agile enthusiasts outside the institutional and academic sphere who are wholeheartedly committed to the recognition, protection, preservation, and promotion that is to the heritagization of music and musicians imprinted on historical gramophone records. No way one can talk about the materiality of the Yugoslav heritage of early recorded music aside from the gramophone records themselves. There are no places of memory or physical objects serving as memorabilia, which Paul Locke emphasizes as important in the process of heritage making. Moreover, the records themselves are only partially preserved, as can be seen from the table on the slide. So, as for the significant part of Edison Belcancala and Electron records, even the elementary factor of their heritage potential is missing, given that no copy has been preserved in any of the documented collections, and they documented a number of collections in Croatian neighboring countries. The main reason for such a fate of these records are in social and political breakdowns, in stealing and destroying the property of the corrupted EBP and later Electroton, in physical wear and tear of the records and their recycling into raw material for new records, but certainly also due to the non-recognition of their value, except from the perspective of individuals, devotees of recorded music, who over time became collectors. Most of today's largest institutional collections in Croatia came into being precisely thanks to such individuals. in their advanced age, they decided to donate their collections. Edward Čapka, the National and University Library, Zagreb, Damir Tomčić to the State Archives in Split, and Velimir Kraket to the City Museum of Sisak. As for the second basic element, the availability of recordings, in this aspect as well, much more prolific are enthusiasts than institutions. Compared to digital recordings made available by Ivan Mirnik, the anonymous Mr. Suan Pan, and several other individuals on their YouTube channels, the recordings provided by national libraries in the region and European projects are incomparably more modest. Also, the institutions are guided by musical and national hierarchies, so that the Croatian institution will give priority to Croatian composers and musicians of classical music, Serbian institution to Serbian, Slovenian to Slovenian material, contrary to the publishing policies and the resulting output of the three companies in question. In a similar way, the reissuing of early recordings has been treated by Yugoton and its successor company, Croatia Records. National belongings figure as a key factor. While in contrast, it seems that Mirnik and Mr. Suan Pan are gradually including all the recordings they possess on their YouTube channels, and they possess a large collection. For a number of analyses carried out as part of our project, in addition to records that we ourselves digitized but are available only internally in the Institute of Technology and Photo Research, Mirnik's and Mr. Suan Pan's recordings were the elementary presupposition that made our analysis possible, since the records that do exist in institutions are not available for listening or for loan, because there are no devices for their reproduction, and because reproduction endangers them. Therefore, the fragile 78 RPM records ought to be digitized, but the digitization is carried out only sporadically without interinstitutional coordination and a well-designed plan, which I would say is primarily a consequence of the unauthorized status of that heritage, and to a lesser extent the lack of possible sources of funding, as it is usually stated. And so the problem continues to spin on and on in a circle. So institutions are sluggish, and individuals, group of individuals, are agile. But it seems that one should not rush from there to the conclusion about the stagnancy and hegemony of institutions and the heroism of individuals, although this is also at work. There is namely an additional stakeholder in the game, the planetary techno-power holders, whose digital platforms, primarily YouTube for recordings and Discogs for discographic metadata, outsource the work process, attracting divisions and divisions of volunteers in the official terminology users, who in return receive the satisfaction of sharing as a reward, as well as the attention and prize of other ordinary users, and possibly some kind of material compensation for this supplementary work in their free time, depending on the regulation of monetary compensation with regard to number of views, registered subscribers, clicks, likes, and similar. The traditional structures from power holders, associated public institutions, and the authorized knowledge they produce in such a game seems like mock-ups of real battles over power, influence, and authority. Besides, there is also the problem of copyright, which institutions really have to take care of, while individuals on their YouTube channels do not have to, especially if they are anonymous, like Mr. Suan Pan. These key actors I call enthusiasts in this paper, elsewhere I call them pure researchers, highlighting their curation and research of historical recordings, referring also to the concept of prosumers, that is both consumers and producers of historical recordings, along with their work on collecting and archiving, digging through diverse materials, audio entering, and so on. All of that with the main purpose for the historical recordings to gain the status of authorized heritage. Apart from the general term of do-it-yourself communities, considering the level of their identification and commitment to historical recordings, typically in the form of more, if not all, of mentioned pure research and roles, considering the enormous amount of time and work invested, and considering the fact of owning records, mostly rare records, and in some cases also unique accompanying documentation related to them, they can also be called heirs, those who inherited the discographic past, a multimedia and multisensory past engraved in records that only thanks to them, their heirs, we can hear and see recordings and labels and feel the grooves and the specific smell of the records if they allow us to physically enter their property. The concept of heirs is all the more appropriate because of its closeness to the concept of heritage and the program of intangible cultural heritage. It is appropriate, on the other hand, because more than heritage and accompanying terms, the heir implies possession and ownership, which we have experienced during the project in the sense of sometimes being denied access to property, sometimes in the sense of communication being based on the exchange of materials, that is on obtaining with the precondition of giving, or sometimes in the sense of the property donors being quite open. Cooperation with enthusiast heirs as a new group of our field collaborators is of course especially sensitive in the research part because it is where the theories, approaches and focuses have been directly confronted. In their research that goes back decades ago, enthusiasts have developed a structure of knowledge and distinction between essential and secondary aspects of research, and now a group of newcomers has appeared, a group from a privileged circle of scholars with high academic degrees, predominantly women, in contrast to them men, and on average younger than them, who moreover scrutinize their approaches and results. So, our new type of fieldwork collaborators are very glad that new partners have appeared with the mission of promoting heritage of recorded music, but on the other hand, they represent a challenge, if not a threat. Enthusiasts sometimes share their knowledge in the form of published papers, but this happens rarely and covers only a fraction of the knowledge they possess. Therefore, a possibility to work in tandem with professional music scholars and musicologists arises as a reasonable option where it is to be expected that enthusiasts will contribute with rich collective material and musicologists with analytical and critical interpretation of that material. Such an example is an article written by a colleague Dan Kalajc and two enthusiasts. To that extent, working with enthusiasts is similar to working with our classical field collaborators, that is similar to combination of lived experience and cultural anthropological interpretation. At the same time, in a collaborative decolonial term, the question arises of how to conceptualize and how to position ourselves as participants in ethnographic disciplines to our field collaborators who were once only informants, then interlocutors and collaborators, while today they're increasingly our co-authors. Given the development of the discipline over the last decade, it may even be ethically necessary for them to emerge as, literally speaking, co-authors of anthropological ethnographic publications, as for instance in the case of an article by Marcia Staszewski and others listed in the slide. And since the enthusiasts we are talking about here are not culture bearers, but the heirs of the discographic past, the issue of recognizing and respecting different competencies and their fruitful interweaving in the genre of scholarly publications is all the more sensitive. And finally, my last point relates to the fact that the recording industry is quintessentially international. Mattresses travel across national borders, they are bought and sold, tested on the market, and with them the music they contain. Consequently, this paper is also an invitation to consider an international project that would shed light on the role of recording industry in culture, thereby also the processes of transformation, mutual influences and exchanges between musical cultures, and therefrom also socio-political changes in Southeastern Europe. I consider it to be an ethnomusicological topic par excellence. So far, looking from the perspective of the project related to the former Yugoslavia, the connections of Yugoslav and Bulgarian companies have been undoubtedly confirmed, specifically primarily between Electroton and Bulgarian trade, as well as with Romania and Greece and the, so to say, Ottoman Ictmd in more general terms regarding the engaged musicians. Of course, even more than that, business ties extend to the countries of Central and Western Europe, especially Czech Republic, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Austria, United Kingdom, and therefore engagement of scholars dealing with these cultures of recorded music would also be desirable. When imagining an international project apart from music scholars and musicologists, I would certainly count on enthusiasts, that is, pure researchers, that is, heirs, who phenomenologically continue the historical sequence from folk ethnographers to action-based research, digital humanities, and post-colonial critique. Also through them and in general, I recognize the changed global social dynamics, the ubiquity of the digital environment and networking, along with simultaneous decline of traditional structures, be they public institutions, academic knowledge, or centers, conventional centers of political power. The main question for us scholars is to probe whether an alliance can be formed between regional Q researchers and ethnomusicologists to help protect and safeguard the heritage of historical commercial sound recordings in the Balkans. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for your interesting paper. It's a very interesting project, Diane. So I think we've got time for two quick questions.
Thank you very much for a fascinating paper. I want to get to my question through a comparative example from Greece, where, according to my collaborators in the music scene, about 11,000 recordings from the 78 RPM period have been digitized and uploaded to various online repositories. And they're all available to various extents of accessibility. Some are in more obscure online forums, and they're slowly being transferred onto YouTube. But the impact of this availability is this massive youth revival in this old repertoire. So I want to ask if there's a similar case in Croatia or other post-Yugoslav cases where this agency of the cure researchers, as you have termed them, contributes to revivalist articulations and repopularizations of certain styles from earlier time periods.
Yeah, thanks for the question. First of all, I'm not familiar with the information you provided, that there are that so many 78 RPM Greek records were preserved and documented and digitized and even available online. Actually, I tried to trace a group of recordings which are directly related to Greece and asking various colleagues, unsuccessfully, coming to some more information about how they came into being. So, I mean, great that later on. I would say, obviously, the process of heritagization is on some later stage in the case of Greece and in the case of Croatia and former Yugoslavia, because I mean these groups of few researchers who are for long in that. But actually, I mean long in terms of research, but in terms of publishing, in terms of initiating these YouTube channels like these two guys. I'm happy that in a way our project, which started 4 years ago, was kind of encouragement for them to exponentially broaden their offer on YouTube. So, and as like in the last session, obviously, I mean, the role of us as researchers is to help through research, to help also, visibility, to talk about it, to push it into the broader audience, and then, we can expect that some kind of revival of old stuff will appear. But at the moment, we cannot say that this is the case.
It's not that active in Croatia.
Sorry?
The revivalist scene is not as active.
I mean, not specifically related to that fund of recordings from the period in question.
Thank you.
One more quick question. Or we're going to share hands of paper. Okay, go to share hands of paper. Okay, to introduce Stefan from Istanbul Technical University, and he's going to operate his own computer to make sure the sound does what he wants it to do.
Hello, thank you. I would like to also thank to the organizers of this beautiful event. I feel delighted to be part of this community for now. Let's check the sound if it works or not. Early recordings of Anatolian Kava, distribution performance practice, and repertoire. After Zurna, the Kava is perhaps the most widely used wind instrument in Anatolia. Laurus describes different types of Kavas in his book, Folk Music Instruments of Turkey. In fact, Anatolian Kavas vary in size, shape, sound quality, and performance practices. Therefore, the term Kava in my talk will refer to a generic term like the flute. It is important to make this distinction because modern Kava players in Turkey play only one version of the instrument in professionalized folk music. Thus, the recorded Kavas in the collection I will talk about vary in size and shape. The recordings under discussion here, gathered by music folklorists such as Muzaffer Sarısözen, Melody Yönetken, Mahmut Ragıp Gazimhan, and some technicians like Rıza Yetişen from various regions of Anatolia between 1937 and 1950. Although the compilation project snapped a considerable length of time from 1937 to 55, it's crucial to highlight that fieldwork was conducted exclusively during summer months. This is likely because the compilers were engaged with other responsibilities within their respective institutions. The primary material gathered from the field encompasses audio recordings, compilation forms, photographs, and musical instruments. These were subsequently stored within the folder archive of the Ankara State Conservatory. As posited by Celal Volkan Kaya, the total number of musical pieces documented by music folklorists is estimated to be approximately 7,000, originating from a diverse area of 246 provinces and performed by 2,305 individual artists. It can be reasonably asserted that it represents the most comprehensive collection of the folk music in Turkey. The collection served a variety of purposes, including providing inspirational musical material for composers, musical text for professional folk musicians and music educators, and ethnographic material for musicologists. A significant number of performances were transcribed into Western notation, resulting in the establishment of the TRT Turkish folk music repertory, which has become a fundamental element of Turkish folk music. The notated folk music is regarded as the most reliable and representative material by Turkish folk musicians, although the recordings themselves have been largely overlooked. In their writings, compilers, Muzaffer Sensöz'den, Mehmet Yönetken, Mahmut Raif Yazmihal, and technician Rıza Yetişen relied on the material they had collected and their own field experiences as the primary source of information. Additionally, other scholars, including Süleyman Şener, Songül Karahasanoğlu, Armağan Coşkun Elçi, Janusz Sipos, and Lawrence Picken, contributed to the analysis of pre-existing material. My own experience of the folklore archive of Ankara State Conservatory was limited in duration. In 2007, I was tasked with preparing my master thesis. My advisor, Mr. Süleyman Şener, recommended that I should catalog the folk material in the archive as my master thesis. Unfortunately, the administrators of the archive informed me that they were engaged in a digitalization project and they wouldn't permit any access to the material until the project was complete. 7 years later, Celal Volkan also applied to the archive with the same objective. Despite being similarly denied access, he was able to obtain copies of forms which had been duplicated by an archive by Nihat Fetçi and Müjdat Başmakçı at the National Radio and Television Archive during the 1970s. In my pursuit of potential recordings, I have primarily relied on Celal Volkan catalog. Currently, the Ankara State Conservatory also has facilitated online public access to compilation forms through their library. Despite its lack of user-friendliness, it is possible to view the compilation forms of thousands of folk materials. Here are 2 examples of compilation forms. So there are some parts that the compiler can fill with about the performer, about the text being performed, song text, sometimes additional notes, transcriptions, or some demonstrations in the structure of instruments. They all take part in those forms. In my inquiry, I initially sought to identify potential kaval recordings from Kayas catalog. This catalog includes the following information for each name, profession, date of birth, hometown, performed instrument. It also includes the following for each recording, compilation year, location, recording number, and additional ethnographic notes. Following several cross-checks, it was determined that over 300 records within the catalog were indeed kaval recordings. Ultimately, a total of 228 kaval recordings were identified. Nevertheless, some unclassified compilation forms indicate the existence of approximately 50 more recordings, for example, from Konya. So, it is therefore possible that the collection may contain a greater number of recordings of kaval music, Turkish kaval music. So, distribution. The kaval recordings were recently obtained from rural areas and highlights in Anatolia from 22 distinct locations where animal herding and nomadic communities reside. The most documented kaval types are long and long kavals, which may or may not have a tongue. However, the compilation tubes also yielded recordings of a Ictmd, a duct flute. For So this is one of the earliest recordings of a kaval player from Aydın, and he plays a kaval, a small one, because it's made of out of eagle bone, in fact, it is a very ancient instrument. Music archaeologists generally find those kinds of flutes, and there is one 2,000 years old Ictmd found in southwestern Anatolia, in Sparta, and it's being exhibited in Burdur Museum, I think. Well, but this is a rare example. Then when we look at the distribution of recordings, we see that inner parts of Anatolia, where Anadolu is common, that parts are home for kaval music, traditional kaval music. It is surprising to me that Turkish tribes have no recording at all. And as a kaval player also myself, I haven't experienced that. It is very surprising because, you know, the other part of the border, Bulgaria, is the country for kaval, and all the Balkans are like that, but Western Anatolia is somehow lacks kaval in distribution. About performance, compilation forms include some pictures taken from the field. So, a total 44 different players performed the musical pieces for the compilation projects. Most of the musicians were villagers, with musicians' occupations recorded on the compilation formed as those are different kinds of kavals, with tone, without tone. If it is without tone, you side blow it. If it is vertical, it should have a tone. So, most of them were farmers, shepherds, teacher, kaval player. It is only one person, one zurna player was also playing kaval. So, laborer, coffee shop owner, cook, watchman, but most of them were either farmers or shepherds. And in this way, since the performer weren't actually professional musicians, it reflects the aesthetics of common people, villagers, rather than peripatetic groups or other professional musicians or archers. On his book on Turkish wind instruments, Mahmut Raif Gazimer posits that the kaval is not an instrument associated with artisans and it does not provide a source of income for its performer. The majority of the kaval players included in the collection were engaged in agricultural and pastoral activities, and it is notable that only 2 of them could be considered as being professional musicians. Conversely, the musical performances themselves are diverse. As indicated in the compilation forms, performers were required to indicate whether they had learned to play kaval independently or through instruction from another individual. Where certain stylistic patterns can be discerned in the recordings, such as pitch content, figurative motive resemblances, or timbral characters, the kaval performers exhibit a distinct individuality. The distinctive nature of the performance practice is a result of the fact that kaval is typically performed in solo setting without an audience, allowing the player to shape all aspects of the sound. At this juncture, it seems relevant to present a bozo kaval from Veli Ayash. Those recordings probably sing the daylight first time after probably 8 years of storage. In accordance with the compilation from the performance, was a prisoner in fact, and he wasn't so happy with the recording because he couldn't sustain the final pitch for the extended time period, it says. Some recordings were conducted in their authentic setting, whereas others were not. For instance, a double chamber performance of Karakol was recorded in the Hurt. So some of the recordings were taken separately in isolated environments, but this is inside the Hurt. You can hear the bark, king of dogs. That was recorded in Kozan. A comparative analysis of early Kaval recordings and contemporary practice reveals notable similarities and deviations. In the context of contemporary Kaval performance, a single version of the instrument, typically Duvan, the Kaval without a tone, is employed. This approach is frequently presented in an ensemble format or with the accompaniment of other folk instruments. It is evident that the stylistic elements inherent to traditional practice that were perceived as suitable were maintained. However, the pitch and tuning were standardized, and intonation became a significant limiting factor in professional practice. The timbre is refined, eliminating any extraneous harmonies. Maybe, let's say, multipleness. Moreover, other stylistic elements that were idiomatic to other instruments or vocal genres were incorporated into Kaval performance. In the light of these considerations, it seems reasonable to conclude that contemporary practice should be interpreted as a product of compromise and adaptation. It would appear that certain performance styles identified in the recordings could not be readily adapted to conventions of professional folk music practice. For example, a joint performance of a Kaval player and vocalist is a particularly uncommon occurrence. It might be surprising to Muzaffer Sarısuzan, the collector, that he requests performance to elucidate and exemplify their performance and in a distinct recording. This is a very rare approach at all. So, musical pieces including tunes, laments, folk songs, tunes with programmatic themes, tunes related to herding. Given the constraints of time, I will focus on the musical practices associated with animal herding. The tale of the black sheep, karakol, is a particularly well-known subject in Kaval music. This is a piece of music with which almost every Kaval player is familiar. There is a story behind it. The narrative commences with a shepherd who falls in love with the daughter of the landlord. He requested her in marriage. Given his low status within the community, the union is deemed unsuitable. However, the Lord is reluctant to reject him directly. Instead, the Lord presents the shepherd with an impossible task to accomplish. The task is to direct the herd to the river after being served with salt for 3 days. Then the shepherd is obliged to return the thirsty herd from drink without drinking water with his kaval. In practice, only the black sheep, the leader of the herd, resists the shepherd's orders for a while, but ultimately responds to the shepherd's pleading. The shepherd accomplishes the seemingly impossible task and subsequently marries the daughter. The narrative exhibits a degree of variability and is likely to have evolved over time. Contemporary Kaval players typically perform the musical piece at musical events, often accompanied by a narration of its historical background. The primary source of the modern musical piece is a variant performed by Ali from Serbia. Modern performers typically adapt the existing text to their own versions. In a similar vein, I also created my own interpretation of karakol. It is anticipated that performances of karakol will encompass a series of episodes and musical themes. It can thus be proposed that the modern karakol is derived from a variant and has undergone a process of classization and standardization over time. In my investigation of available recordings, I encountered 8 pieces that were explicitly identified as black sheep, karakol, and additional 27 pieces that were closely related to subject of herding. These include tie the herd to the river and return, wake the herd, move the herd, make the herd walk slowly, warn the sheepdog, wolf is approaching, wake the dog, sheep tune, male sheep tune, shepherd tune, and so on. It can be argued that none of the mentioned recordings were direct variants of both Ali Bozan's version. However, some of them feature figurative resemblances as evidenced by the recording, some of the recordings, which I won't talk about now. The animal herding recordings in the collection exhibit a diverse melodic organization, which lends support to hypothesis that traditional Kaval performance may manifest individuality. It is therefore reasonable to posit that 35 tunes related to herd and herding may provide insight into an understanding of pastoral and nomadic life. It is possible to formulate a hypothesis that suggests Anatolian pastoralists cultivated sound sets through which they communicated with and controlled their livestock, particularly the herd, including sheep and goats and sheepdogs. The sound of Kaval would also serve to inform others of the current location and well-being of the herd, which was of the vital importance to the community. This archaic knowledge, transmitted through generations of humans and animals, was instrumental in ensuring the survival of the community. If this is indeed the case, how did the Anatolian pastoralists come to discover methods of communication with animals through the use of kaval? What distinguishes the kaval from other musical instruments? It would be of interest to ascertain whether the tunes, instruments, or other musical elements applied in such a manner are related across communities. Such questions could also facilitate a shift in focus from musical evolution of what is commonly referred to as folklore material to realms of ecomusicology, soundscape studies, and epistemology. In my estimation, there is evidence in the compilation forms that lends support the hypothesis you can see little information in the form worked as a tool to hurt in general. One of the most significant challenges in attempting to answer those questions in a deeper level is the problem is we are not the field workers of that project, and we don't have deep data on those recordings. So what should be the next stage for me to go to the field, since the animal herding is modernized and probably that pastoral life is not taking place anymore, I mean, as subsequently as it was before. So, but anyway, I am planning to the next stage to go to the field and follow the footsteps of those collectors in the Napoca, as Demersipos once did for Bartok's route, for example. And I would appreciate also, especially in local literature, if you have some knowledge around the Balkans on that subject, communication with animals through music, shepherding or herding, please let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I think we probably have time for just one question. Judy?
I'm just wondering what kind of organological information is that you might be able to find in old instruments in terms of tunings and, as you said, in terms of these weird sounds and tunings.
Yeah, I think the tuning was also variable among the artists. Probably they were personally produced instruments. So I'm not sure, but I don't expect them to be standardized in pitch. But it is possible to hear their, recordings now. So I think in terms of intervals, it is consistent. But if you are asking for tuning, it is not.
Yeah.
I think we're finished there. We have to pause. We have to leave in 10 minutes, approximately. So we need to be.
Leave now.
Lay down. This is good.
Leave now.
Leave now. Yeah. Anyway, if people can get ready, and then we'll walk to where we get the coach.
Yes, here Cluj Napoca is waiting for us. It's near the place we eat. It's not so far, so it's in that direction. I think it's better if we go all together.